The biggest prospect in the 2024 NFL Draft has a big problem off the field, how it impacts the Cincinnati Bengals on the field in their quest to add defensive line help. Hi again, everyone, and welcome in to Enter the Jungle. I'm James Rapien. He is Andrew Fox Miller, and this is Cincinnati Bengals Talk. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell on YouTube, and check us out weekly on Bally Sports and every Tuesday night right here on CBT. We're part of the Big Play Network, and shout out to our sponsors, Garage Beer for getting me through National Beer Day, and Typico for getting me through the tournament. The bracket was crazy on both the men's and the women's side, and Typico certainly helped with that. Andrew, it's wild. We're just over 2 weeks away as we record this, a few weeks away from the NFL Draft. And T'Vondre Sweat, the defensive tackle from Texas, is someone a lot of our viewers want, and for good reason. 6'4", 366 pounds, by far the biggest defensive tackle in this draft, by far the biggest prospect in this draft, and someone that moved well for his size, visited the team last week. Well, he was arrested over the weekend for an OVI in Texas. What does it mean? Well, we don't have all the details, and I'm not going to speculate about the legal side. Here's what I do know is there were already questions about T'Vondre Sweat and where he would go in the draft. And so the fact that this is on top of that, and you have NFL draft experts like Dane Brugler pointing out the fact that T'Vondre Sweat's partying was a topic for NFL teams that they were researching during these visits. Again, he was in Cincinnati last week meeting with the Bengals. I wouldn't be shocked if he's off the Bengals board entirely. And if he's on it, I would be surprised now if they take him with any of those first 4 picks on the first day one. Obviously, he's not going to be a first rounder. Or day 2. They have 3 selections. I don't think they're taking him in rounds 2 or 3.
So he could fall and not even 4th pick. Not going to happen, you're saying?
I don't think so. No, I think he was already. There were a lot of our viewers that wanted him at pick 49, that wanted him in the second round, that thought he was a no-brainer because of the size, because of losing DJ Reader, because they were sick and tired of watching teams run through the Bengals last year. And I get all of that. I do. But I don't think the Bengals were all the way in anyways on him at 49. And so now with this, if they weren't fully in on him at round 2, I'm not sure they're even getting close to round 3 for him. And this might be much, much later in the draft. What's your reaction just from a Bengals fan standpoint when you hear me say that? Because I think there are people right now that are rolling their eyes. I can feel it. Rolling their eyes at the idea that the Bengals would pass on T'Vondre Sweat on the first 2 days of the draft. Your reaction?
I think that I agree with you. I understand the concern because we talked about it here on this show before, which was, well, you only realistically have 2 options at that defensive tackle position, presumably in the first round. And then, hey, look, if that doesn't work out, no pressure, no pressure. We got T'Vondre Sweat still. Don't forget about that. And you take that off the board, figuratively. Does it add a little bit of pressure to sort of invest in that position maybe sooner than you want, or reach on someone after you would have normally taken Sweat for another defensive tackle that maybe you don't need to reach it? Does it change the strategy? That's what I'm concerned about.
I totally get that. And I think a lot of people went there, and it better not. Let's start there. It better not change the strategy because to me, T'Vondre Sweat was sort of the unicorn. There aren't many nose tackles in this draft. Like, people are going to talk about Byron Murphy and Johnny Newton at pick 18. Those don't fill the role of nose tackle, neither guy. And there are some that are going to say, oh, well, Byron Murphy played nose tackle at Texas. Doing that at Texas at 296 pounds or whatever he is, and doing that in the AFC North is much, much different. And so you want to be around 320 like DJ Reader was. You don't need to be 366 like T'Vondre Sweat. At the same time, I think there's a couple of things here. One, there were questions about him anyways. And when there are questions about a prospect, we've seen the Bengals get burned by one a few years ago when they went after the LSU defensive tackle, who's Tyler Shelvin. He was escaping my brain for a second, but they draft Tyler Shelvin. And let me be clear, Tyler Shelvin was not the prospect that you have here in T'Vondre Sweat. At the same time, when you get burned by a guy where work ethic is kind of a question, the off-the-field discipline just in general is a topic, that kind of sticks with you. And I think it stuck with them last year when they looked at DeJuan Jones out of Ohio State. He had some weight issues. He talked in meetings with teams reportedly about how he loved basketball and more than football. And you look up and he might end up being a really good player. But the Bengals were like, we'll stay away. DeJuan Jones didn't get in trouble 2 weeks before the draft. And again, who knows? We don't know the whole story, but it doesn't feel good, certainly. And it could obviously be bad. And so we don't know. But what we do know is that there were questions already about T'Vondre Sweat. When I say I don't think they were in round 2, I'm not just making it up out of thin air. And so combine that with what happened over the weekend, I would be surprised, to be honest with you, if they take him anywhere earlier than round 6. I think they're going to be at least a round or 2 later than everyone expects. Like if you think they're going to take him in round 4, I just think they'll be like, we don't want to burn that round 4 pick like we did with Tyler Shelvin. We can find someone that we think is going to come in and work really hard, like a Cordell Volson. And that matters, the work ethic element and the off the field element, the character stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I guess then it's a question of, hey, look, odds are he's going to be gone before Bengals are even faced with probably making that decision when it comes to maybe even 4th rounder, right?
Yeah, I think he could go sooner, but not much sooner. I think the whole NFL is going to fade him. This is such a bad look. Say it out loud. Yeah, this is you getting in trouble while you're in a 3-month job interview process for one of the elite jobs in your profession on the planet. That's what this is. And so when you put that in perspective, this isn't interviewing for colleges or your average first job out of college. This is the show. This is the goal. This is what, in a lot of fields, you get to at 30, 40, 50 years old. And I get it. He's young and he's going to make mistakes. And he may end up being a really good NFL player. But there are a bunch of defensive tackles that we could talk about coming up that get kicked up a little bit, kicked up a notch. And then to your point, you don't want the Bengals to kick those guys up too far because they like their character and they know they need to address defensive tackle.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to defensive tackle, we've been saying that it seems almost inevitable they're going to go with offensive tackle, right? But there's still possibility for defensive tackle. Murphy, Newton could fall. And like you said, it's interior. So they could still go after them for their talent. But I just don't let Sweat change the strategy. I can't help but sit here as a fan and get nervous about what's coming off the board in those first several rounds, so to speak. It feels like in our world, as people that are following the Bengals, that pool at that position, both in the league now and prospective players that could be entering the league, it just feels like it's just a weird year to get smaller and smaller. And I don't know. I get anxious about that.
We're talking defensive tackle. We're going to continue that conversation. What other defensive tackles could the Bengals target? We will get to some names, get to some visits that they've already had with guys that they could target on day 2 and day 3 of the draft. Plus, even though the NFL draft is a few weeks away, Andrew, I'm willing to make one guarantee when it comes to the Bengals draft plans. I will do that coming up next. Welcome back to Enter the Jungle. He's Andrew Fox Miller. I'm James Rapien, and this is Cincinnati Bengals Talk. Andrew, the NFL draft just a few weeks away. I have a guarantee for you. Are you ready for this? Hold on to your butt. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready. Yes.
Are you holding your butt?
I'm just glad you didn't delay it and kind of keep me waiting. We're just coming in hot. I love it.
Because you mentioned Murphy and Newton. And there are a lot of people that are going to say, yeah, Murphy, Newton. There are going to be others that say Braden Fisk in round 2. I like Chris Jenkins from Michigan in round 2. There's going to be people that say Rook Ororo from Clemson. That's a real name. In round 2 or round 3. There's all these guys. Michael Hall Jr. from Ohio State. All these guys we're going to talk about. And the guarantee that I'm going to make, because the Bengals have 10 picks, because the Bengals clearly have a need at nose tackle. None of those guys are nose tackles that I just named. None of them. Is they are going to double dip at defensive tackle. They are going to take 2. They're going to take at least one that you've heard of, and they're probably going to take one that you haven't heard of, with 2 of those 10 picks going to the interior of their defensive front, because you've heard of T'Vondre Sweat. But have you heard of McKinley Jackson? Have you heard of Justin Rogers? Have you heard of Mason Smith out of LSU, who's probably the biggest named defensive tackle, not named T'Vondre Sweat, that they brought in? They have done their due diligence on defensive tackles, Andrew, and I would be stunned if they didn't add not one, even if they take one in the first round, your favorite one, Murphy, Newton, whatever the case is. I'd be stunned if they didn't end up with 2 defensive tackles in this year's class.
Okay. All right. I think that's fair. You're not going to guarantee where those 2 are going to go. Not, but
I'll guarantee. Well, here, I'll guarantee this. I can't guarantee. I guarantee they'll take one on day 3. I can't guarantee that they'll take one on day 2 because there is a chance where the board falls a certain way where they take Byron Murphy.
Sure.
Where they go with the defensive tackle, like you said. Where they maybe take a Johnny Newton. Maybe they trade down and take Johnny Newton. So I don't want to completely dismiss that possibility because it is possible, certainly, this far out especially. But I think the most likely scenario is they take one on day 2 with either pick 49 or 80 or 97. And then they double back on day 3 and in rounds 4 through 7, where they have 4 picks in rounds 6 and 7. They'll probably use some of those to maneuver around and move up. At the same time, I think they're going to get 2 defensive tackles. And just some of these names, Andrew, and sort of why, if I'm building a value chart, obviously offensive tackle, there's great value in round 1. I think the sweet spot for defensive tackle is day 2. Because there's going to be guys like Braden Fisk, like I said, Chris Jenkins, Michael Hall Jr., Rook Aroraro, Makai Wingo, who they've met with, Dwayne Carter out of Duke, Mason Smith, who they've met with, Jordan Jefferson, Leonard Taylor, Tyler Davis could be on day 3. Like, there's a lot of guys that they could target. And can I give you my fear now? Because I've talked a lot about defensive tackle. It has to do with the guy I just mentioned. So Mason Smith, and be honest with me, because it's draft time. Everyone's learning these names. Before he visited last week, was he on your radar? Was he on your radar as far as the draft goes?
No. I mean, as soon as you hear about the visit, you start clicking, you start looking into them, seeing what's up. And yeah, that was the first time I was like, a defensive tackle, that caught my attention. Let's see what we got. Mason Smith.
My fear with Mason Smith, and I like the player, I do, is that they panic. And they might have done this, and it's not necessarily panic like they're panicking, but it's that they get comfortable looking at the board, saying, oh yeah, we'll take Mason Smith at 49. Productive player at LSU, missed an entire year to a torn ACL, but we think he can be a disruptive force on the interior. And so we'll take an offensive tackle at 18. Mason Smith will be there at 49, and we'll take him. That scares me. I like him in round 3. I don't really see a scenario where he's worth going in round 2, and yet I look at some of these big boards, the Daniel Jeremiahs of the world. A lot of the draft stuff, a lot of this is just information gathering. Even for GMs, you try to get as much information as you can. And it feels like Mason Smith, he's on the uptick. It feels like there are people looking at him and teams looking at him specifically as a top 50 player. And the Bengals are drafting 49th. That's my fear because he could be a really good player. I just think there's a lot of risk with him. It's not like he had a ton of production. I have other guys that like Chris Jenkins that I think is just much safer and can be productive right away and contribute right away. And so we'll see. But I could totally see them taking Mason Smith in pick 49 round 2. And that falls right in line with what you said about the idea of them sort of panicking or their board shifting because the defensive tackle class got a little lighter, literally and figuratively, at least when it comes to day 2 with T'Vondre Sweat.
And in that scenario, you're probably also hoping, I hope they circle back around and grab another guy they're high on their board at that position so they can fulfill those 2 players at that position that they're actually needing to get for depth. But I don't know. If we're talking pick 49, I can only imagine the players that are going to be available to them, how the draft is going to fall to them at that point. And that'll be one of those picks that if that happens, depending on how Smith pans out, you'll continuously go back and just name all the players that ended up delivering, huge immediate impact and return in the draft.
Yeah, my hope is that they find someone falling that's got a low round 1 grade for them that falls to them at pick 49. Up next, how comfortable are you with the Bengals offensive line? The latest rankings, they're much higher than you might think. We will get to that on Enter the Jungle. Welcome back to Enter the Jungle. He's Andrew Fox Miller. I'm James Rapien, and the Bengals offensive line has been a hot button topic for years now. And over the past few years, they've signed Ted Karras, Alex Cappa, Orlando Brown Jr., Trent Brown. They've drafted Cordell Volson. And so where does the Bengals offensive line stack up from a pass protection standpoint? Well, Ben Baldwin, who's into these advanced analytics metrics, just projecting what these offensive lines could do in 2024, he has the Bengals as the 7th best pass protecting offensive line, and everyone has a 79 or better except for Cordell Volson, and they're right there with the Browns, ahead of the Rams, ahead of the Chargers, ahead of some good teams, and obviously the Bengals are a pass-first team. Andrew, is that too high? Do you expect the Bengals to be the 7th best pass protecting offensive line? Starters only, of course, depending on injuries and all of those things. That doesn't take that into account, but they're starters. Are you confident that they could deliver on that expectation?
I mean, do I anticipate that they'll deliver on that expectation? Hard for me to say. Do I expect it of them? I absolutely do. Especially when you look at the money they've invested in it. We talked about it time and time again. I feel like we haven't given them even a fair shot to a degree. And what I mean by that is, how many weeks did we have a healthy Joe Burrow behind this line, especially with Orlando Brown Jr. entering the mix? And now we've got a change at right tackle. I feel like this is a chance to actually get eyes on the situation that we didn't really get a fair sample size of. The offense had to change a bit. Jake Browning is a bit of a different quarterback. I don't know what I saw there beyond some very clear truths on how some player performances were, but like when you start changing the game plan to Burrow, a healthy Joe Burrow, I'm not shocked by this. I feel like, as far as let's go. This is the line that we've been building for this quarterback.
I totally agree.
Oh, okay.
I remember saying at the end of last season, it's funny, the offensive line's been such a topic, and now this is why they're winning games. And that doesn't mean Jake Browning and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Joe Mixon. That doesn't mean those guys weren't making plays. But the offensive line was a stabilizing force in a season full of injuries and crap that they had to deal with and just all this adversity that they were going through. And the offensive line was stable. Were they perfect? No, but they were stable. And if you give Joe Burrow stable, he's going to cook. He's going to be awesome. We know that. And so I expect them to be really darn good. I think Trent Brown, from a pass protection standpoint, I'm not sure there's really a doubt that he's an upgrade. Now, durability matters. They didn't have a starter miss a game last year. That's hard to do. I think Alex Cappa will be better. I think Cordell Volson will be better. Orlando Brown Jr. is going to be healthy. I think he'll be better. Ted Karras is going to be that stabilizing force that I just mentioned. I think the offensive line is going to be really darn good when they're healthy. That doesn't mean they shouldn't add to it in the draft. I expect them to early with their first 2 picks, probably with the 18th pick. More on the draft coming up on next week's show. But Eclipse 2024. My thoughts on that, Andrew's thoughts on it, and how it relates to football, plus something really, really cool that was shared over the weekend as well. We will discuss all of those topics coming up next. Welcome back to Enter the Jungle. I'm James Rapien. He is Andrew Fox Miller, and we couldn't be more excited about our partnership with Big Play and Bally Sports. Shout out to everyone that's commented and mentioned over the past few weeks, especially about us being on Bally Sports and seeing us, whether it's at home, whether it is in your favorite establishment, whether it's on Newport on the Levee. Shout out to Bengal Jim for this photo. Andrew, you got a big head, but I must say we look pretty good.
I commented, I felt like this looked like a dystopian sci-fi situation. This is like a Blade Runner or Minority Report. It's like us on the screen, like, you will drink garage beer, and it was unsettling, but awesome all the same.
Use promo code Cincy100 at Typical. No. Yeah, that's right. That's it. Get me a lime garage beer while you're going to the fridge, Andrew. But speaking of that, I think a lot of garage beers were had on Monday, Eclipse Day. You went with the fam, checked it out. Your main takeaways on Monday on an Eclipse, something that doesn't happen so often.
Yeah. So first of all, I like how this show is evolving to where we spend our final segment highlighting what I did to not prepare for this show. Like what were you off doing when we were getting ready for this show? It was not, that had nothing to do with it. I get it. Pro Football Hall of Fame. the Eclipse. What's next week? I don't know yet. We'll find out. But
and on this week's edition of Andrew Slacks and isn't dedicated enough, he checked out
Andrew's not busy
the
working.
Eclipse. Meanwhile, I was in this office grinding, watching Tavondre Sweat, seeing if he could be worthy of a 6th round pick. That's what I was doing.
Well, I will say that I had no real plans of going to see it initially. Kids are off school. We decided to go at the last minute. We ended up going to Miami Whitewater. It was crazy traffic, but I will say it was pretty cool to see in 100% totality. It's like everything, just that ring around and everything, just darkness, and a breeze picks up and it gets cool and the air just gets still. It was pretty sweet. Now, I will say, I didn't see any Bengals gear on anyone there, but I was going to ask someone if they would have rather seen the Eclipse or seen the Bengals in a Super Bowl again, because some people are crazy about the Eclipse.
The answer is Super Bowl. It's not even close. The things that I would list before the Eclipse would take up way more time than we have. But I will say this is much better. This is the Enter the Jungle Eclipse. How about that? Now that is an Eclipse I can get behind. This is worth going to Miami Whitewater for. If they did this at Miami Whitewater, I think you would sit in traffic all day long to see it in person.
It's adding to my point of the sort of end of times by merging the two together.
Make sure you subscribe on Cincinnati Bengals Talk and check us out on Bally Sports. For Andrew Fox Miller, I'm James Rapien. As always, thank you so much for watching. Enter the Jungle.